The red earth stretched endlessly beneath a merciless sun, cracked and thirsty like the souls who dared call this place home. Wyoming Territory, 1882. A land where rattlesnakes coiled in the shade of scattered rocks, where coyotes howled their loneliness to an indifferent moon, and where people learned to keep their hearts as barren as the landscape that surrounded them. The wagon jolted over another rut, and Eleanor Whitman, though she'd been Eleanor Briggs for 7 years until death claimed her husband, gripped the wooden bench to steady herself. Her gloved hands, once soft and pale, now bore the calluses of endless toil. She kept her head down, the wide brim of her bonnet casting shadows across what remained of her face. "Stop your fidgeting," Martha Briggs snapped from across the wagon bed. Her former mother-in-law's voice cut through the desert air like a rusty blade. "You'll scare the horses with all that movement, though Lord knows, they've seen worse than you." Eleanor stilled, a practiced response to years of such cutting remarks. She'd learned that stillness was her only defense, that becoming invisible was the closest thing to peace she could hope for. The fever had come 3 winters past. She remembered little of those dark days, only the burning, the delirium, and waking to find her husband James staring at her with undisguised revulsion. The pox had taken its toll, leaving her once smooth skin marked with deep scars that traced across her cheeks and forehead like a map of suffering. "Cursed," James had muttered that first morning, backing away from their marriage bed. God's punishment. He'd died 6 months later, thrown from a horse he'd been too drunk to ride properly. The Briggs family had blamed her for that too, said her ugliness had driven him to drink, that she'd brought a curse upon their household. Almost there, Marcus Briggs called from the driver's seat. Martha's eldest son had inherited her cruel tongue and cold eyes. "The Murphy place is just over that ridge." Eleanor's stomach tightened. They'd told her nothing of where she was going, only that she would work to pay her debts to the family. She'd overheard fragments of conversation, something about a distant cousin who needed help on his ranch, someone too far from town to be particular about appearances. The wagon crested the hill, and Eleanor caught her first glimpse of her new prison. A modest ranch house squatted against the horizon, its weathered boards the color of dried blood in the afternoon light. A few outbuildings scattered nearby, a barn, a small bunkhouse, what might have been a smokehouse, no other homesteads visible for miles in any direction. "Remember," Martha hissed, leaning close enough that Eleanor could smell the peppermint she chewed to hide her rotting teeth. "You're here to work, nothing more. Samuel Murphy is a respectable man. Even if he chooses to live like a hermit, you cause him any trouble, any shame, and there won't be a hole deep enough in this territory for you to hide in." They pulled up before the house, and Eleanor saw him for the first time. Samuel Murphy stood on his porch like a mountain given human form, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and a full beard that hadn't seen a barber in months. He wore simple work clothes, clean but mended in places, and his boots were caked with the eternal dust of the frontier. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as winter storms. They watched their approach without warmth or welcome, but also without the disgust she'd grown accustomed to seeing. "Samuel," Marcus called out with false cheer. "Brought you that help we discussed." The man nodded once, his gaze shifting to Eleanor. She braced herself for the familiar flinch, the averting of eyes, the muttered curse. Instead, he simply looked at her, steady and unblinking, as if cataloging nothing more interesting than the color of her dress. "Ma'am," he said, his voice deep and roughened by disuse. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been courtesy or mere habit. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, her few possessions in a worn carpet bag. The Briggs family hadn't allowed her to take much. 2 dresses, both black, some undergarments, a Bible she never read anymore, and hidden in the very bottom, the silver brush James had given her on their wedding day. She didn't know why she kept it. She rarely looked in mirrors anymore. "She's a hard worker," Martha said, though her tone suggested she believed otherwise. "Knows cooking, cleaning, mending. She won't give you any trouble." Samuel's eyes remained on Eleanor. "What's your name?" "Eleanor," she whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again. "Eleanor Whitman, sir." "No need for sir," he said. "Samuel will do." He gestured toward the house. "There's a room off the kitchen, small but private. You'll take your meals in the kitchen after I've finished. Wash day is Monday. Town supplies come in monthly. Any questions?" Eleanor shook her head. The litany of rules was familiar. Stay out of sight. Don't presume. Know your place. Marcus was already turning the wagon around, eager to be gone before the sun dropped lower. Martha threw one last venomous look at Eleanor. "Remember what you are," she said, the words carrying more threat than volume. Then they were gone, dust clouds marking their retreat, and Eleanor stood alone with this stranger who now controlled her fate. Samuel studied her for another moment, then turned toward the house. "Best get settled before dark. Coyotes get bold when the sun goes down." Eleanor followed him inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The house was sparse but clean, everything in its place. No photographs on the mantel, no woman's touch in the curtains or cushions. A bachelor's home, practical and austere. He showed her to her room, barely larger than a pantry, but it had a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window that looked out toward the endless prairie. On the bed lay a folded blanket and a pillow that smelled of sage. "Supper's at 6, he said. "There's beans and salt pork in the larder, coffee in the tin by the stove." He paused at the doorway. "The well's out back. Watch for snakes." Then he was gone, his footsteps heavy on the floorboards as he moved through the house. Eleanor set down her carpet bag and sat on the edge of the bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear him moving about. The ordinary sounds of a man in his own space, a chair scraping, a door opening and closing, the metallic clink of what might have been a flask or a pocket watch. As darkness crept across the land, Eleanor unpacked her few belongings. She hung her spare dress on a nail in the wall, placed her undergarments in the single drawer of a battered dresser, and set the Bible on the windowsill, the silver brush she kept hidden, wrapped in a petticoat at the bottom of the drawer. She found the kitchen and set about making supper. The larder was well stocked if basic. Flour, lard, dried beans, salt pork, coffee, a few withered potatoes, and, surprisingly, a small collection of spices that suggested someone here had once cared about how food tasted. As she worked, she fell into the familiar rhythm that had sustained her through the dark years with the Briggs family. Hands busy, mind empty, existing in the space between each breath. She seasoned the beans with a careful hand, fried the salt pork until it was crispy, and made a batch of simple biscuits. When 6 o'clock came, marked by an old clock in the main room, she set a single place at the table and retreated to the kitchen. She heard Samuel enter, heard the scrape of his chair, the quiet sounds of a man eating alone. No comment came about the food, neither praise nor criticism. After sufficient time had passed, she ventured out to clear the table. He was gone, though she hadn't heard him leave. His plate was empty, a good sign, and he'd left it neatly positioned, easier for her to collect. She ate her own meal standing at the kitchen counter, the same food, but somehow it tasted like ash in her mouth. Through the window, she could see the first stars emerging in the darkening sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, as if the emptiness of the land demanded compensation from the heavens. Later, lying in her narrow bed, she listened to the night sounds of this new place. Coyotes, as promised, their calls echoing across the darkness, the wind testing the boards of the house, finding every crack and crevice. And somewhere in the house, the sound of footsteps pacing, back and forth, the restless movement of a man wrestling with his own ghosts. Eleanor pulled the thin blanket up to her chin and stared at the ceiling. She'd traded one form of servitude for another, one prison for the next. But at least here, in this desolate place with this taciturn stranger, she could be invisible. And for a woman who'd learned that being seen meant being scorned, invisibility felt almost like freedom. The wolves howled again, closer this time, and Eleanor closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new silences to navigate, new ways to make herself small and useful and forgotten. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, no one had called her ugly. No one had blamed her for their misfortunes. No one had reminded her what she was. In the darkness of the frontier, where civilization's rules grew thin and strange, perhaps there was space for the curse to simply exist. It wasn't hope. Eleanor had given up on hope the morning she'd seen her scarred face in James's shaving mirror. But it was something, and something she'd learned was better than nothing at all. The days fell into a rhythm as predictable as the sunrise over the prairie. Eleanor rose before dawn, built up the fire in the kitchen stove, and set coffee to boiling. By the time Samuel emerged from his room, breakfast would be waiting, biscuits and gravy, fried eggs when the hens were laying, sometimes flapjacks with the last of the sorghum molasses. He never spoke during these early hours, just nodded his acknowledgement and ate in silence. Eleanor learned to read his preferences in what he finished and what he left behind. More pepper in the gravy, less salt in the biscuits, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. After breakfast, she'd find small notes left on the kitchen table, written in a careful hand. Storm coming, secure the shutters. Or, gone to check the north pasture. Back by sunset. Sometimes just, low on flour. These brief communications became her guidebook to this strange, quiet life. She treasured them in a way she couldn't quite explain. These evidence that someone acknowledged her existence, even if only to convey practical matters. The work was hard but familiar. She scrubbed floors until the boards showed their grain, mended tears in Samuel's work shirts with tiny, careful stitches, beat the dust from rugs and curtains that hadn't seen a woman's care in years. In the garden behind the house, she coaxed life from the stubborn soil, carrots and turnips, a few hardy herbs that could survive the brutal sun. Samuel kept his distance, always. He moved through the house like a shadow at the edges of her vision, there and gone before she could properly register his presence. But she felt his awareness of her, noticed small changes that spoke louder than words. A new bolt on her door for privacy. Fresh water already drawn from the well when she rose each morning. A pair of work gloves left on her windowsill when her hands grew raw from lye soap. 3 weeks into her servitude, the near accident happened. Eleanor was in the barn, forking fresh hay into the stalls, when Samuel's horse, a temperamental stallion named Tempest, suddenly reared. Perhaps a snake had spooked him, or maybe just the unexpected sight of a woman in what he considered his domain. The massive hooves came down inches from where Eleanor stood frozen, her mind blank with sudden terror. Then Samuel was there, materializing from nowhere, his strong arms wrapping around her waist and pulling her back, out of harm's way. For a moment, just a heartbeat, they stood pressed together, his chest solid against her back, his breath warm against her ear. She could smell him, leather and wood smoke, honest sweat and something else, something indefinably male that made her stomach flutter in a way it hadn't since before the fever. His hands spanned her waist, and she realized with a shock that he was trembling. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. No. She could barely speak past the tightness in her throat. He held her for another second, perhaps 2, then stepped back as if burned. Without another word, he turned and left the barn, leaving Eleanor standing there with hay dust dancing in the slanted sunlight and her heart hammering against her ribs. That night, her dreams were different. Instead of the usual nightmares, James's disgusted face, Martha's cruel laughter, she dreamed of strong arms and safety, of being held by someone who didn't flinch at her touch. She woke with tears on her scarred cheeks and an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with sorrow. The weather grew colder as autumn crept across the territory. Eleanor added wood splitting to her duties, though she often found the pile replenished when she went to fetch logs. She pretended not to notice, just as Samuel pretended not to watch her from the window as she worked in the garden, harvesting the last vegetables before frost claimed them. One evening, as she served supper, Her sleeve caught on the edge of the table and pulled back, revealing the marks that climbed her forearm. She yanked the fabric down quickly, but not before Samuel's eyes tracked the movement. "The fever?" he asked quietly. It was the first personal question he'd ever posed. Eleanor nodded, unable to meet his gaze. 3 winters passed. "My sister had it." His voice was distant. Remembering. "She was 15, prettiest girl in 3 counties. Everyone said—" He paused, and Eleanor held her breath. After the fever, folks couldn't see past the scars. She took to wearing a veil, hiding away. Married the first man who'd have her, just to escape the stares. What happened to her? Died in childbirth 2 years later. Him being a drunk didn't help matters. Samuel's jaw tightened. Sometimes I think the fever was kinder than what came after. Eleanor's hands twisted in her apron. The living can be cruel. Yes, he agreed simply. They can. After that night, something shifted between them. The silence became less oppressive, more companionable. Samuel began taking his coffee in the kitchen while Eleanor prepared breakfast, reading week-old newspapers from town. Sometimes he'd read items aloud, cattle prices, news from back east, advertisements for miracle cures and farming equipment. Eleanor found herself timing her chores to coincide with his presence, mending by the fireplace while he cleaned his rifles, grinding coffee while he worked on ledgers at the kitchen table. They rarely spoke, but the quiet held a different quality now, warm rather than cold, shared rather than endured. She began leaving small touches throughout the house. Wildflowers in a mason jar on the dining table, a quilt she'd discovered in a trunk, aired out and placed over his chair, fresh mint from the garden dried and hung in the kitchen, filling the air with its clean scent. Samuel never commented on these changes, but she noticed he was careful not to disturb her arrangements. Once, she saw him pause by the wildflowers, reaching out to touch one delicate petal with a gentleness that made her chest tight. The first winter storm caught them both by surprise. Samuel had been checking fences in the far pasture when the sky turned black and the wind rose to a howl. Eleanor watched from the window as snow began to fall, first in lazy flakes, then in horizontal sheets that obscured everything beyond the porch. Hours passed. The temperature plummeted. Eleanor kept the fires burning and coffee hot, but her anxiety grew with each passing minute. Samuel knew these plains, knew how to read the weather, but storms like this could disorient even experienced men. She'd heard too many stories of ranchers found frozen just yards from their own doors. When the barn door slammed open in the wind, she made her decision, wrapping herself in every layer she could find. Eleanor ventured into the storm. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and numbing her face within seconds. She found him by the corral, fighting to secure a gate that had come loose. His hat was gone, his coat crusted with ice. When he saw her, his eyes widened in something that might have been fear. "Get inside!" he shouted over the wind. Instead, she grabbed the other end of the gate, adding her strength to his. Together they wrestled it closed, fingers numb and clumsy with cold. Then, without discussion, she took his arm and guided him back toward the house, both of them stumbling through drifts that seemed to rise from nowhere. Inside, Samuel was shaking so hard he couldn't manage the buttons of his coat. Eleanor brushed his hands aside and did it herself, peeling away the frozen layers to reveal skin far too pale. She pulled him toward the fire, grabbed blankets from her own bed to wrap around his shoulders. "Foolish," he muttered through chattering teeth. "Should have come back sooner." "Yes," she agreed, surprising him. "Foolish to stay out, foolish to think I wouldn't notice, foolish to believe you're alone out here." His eyes met hers then, really met them, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the storm outside. Eleanor made hot coffee laced with whiskey from the bottle she'd found in his desk. For medicinal purposes, of course. She sat with him by the fire until his shivering stopped and color returned to his face. At some point, the wind died down, leaving only the soft whisper of falling snow. "Eleanor," he said finally, his voice rough, "why did you come looking for me?" She considered the question, staring into the flames. Because you would have done the same for me. It was the simple truth, and they both knew it. Whatever strange dance they'd been doing these past months, whatever careful distance they'd maintained, it couldn't change the fundamental fact that they had become necessary to each other. That night, the storm raged on, sealing them in a world of their own making. And in the morning, when Eleanor emerged to find Samuel had already cleared a path to the barn and left fresh water by her door, she smiled for the first time in 3 years. The snow had transformed the harsh landscape into something softer, almost beautiful, like scars, she thought, covered over but not erased, still there beneath the surface, but perhaps not the only thing worth seeing. Eleanor tried to retreat into her established patterns after the storm, maintaining the careful distance that had defined their arrangement. But something had shifted that night by the fire. Some invisible barrier had cracked, and pretending otherwise became a weight she could barely carry. She found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved with surprising gentleness when working with the horses, how he unconsciously rubbed his left shoulder where some old injury must still pain him, the rare moments when something almost like a smile would soften the hard lines of his face. What she didn't know was that Samuel watched her too, watched her hum softly while kneading bread, her scarred face peaceful in concentration, watched her coax seedlings to life in the kitchen window despite the bitter cold outside, watched her mend his clothes with stitches so fine they seemed to heal the fabric rather than simply join it. The awareness grew between them like a living thing, filling the spaces where words should have been. One morning, Eleanor found something unexpected on her doorstep, a wooden comb, carved from what looked like pine, its handle decorated with simple but elegant swirls. No note accompanied it, but she knew. Her hidden silver brush had developed a crack, making it painful to use. She'd been making do with her fingers, not realizing Samuel had noticed. She used the comb that evening, sitting on her narrow bed, working through the tangles in her long hair. It fit perfectly in her hand, as if carved specifically for her grip. Through the thin walls, she could hear Samuel moving about in his room, and wondered if he was listening to the whisper of wood through hair, if he was imagining. She stopped that thought before it could fully form. Such imaginings were not for women like her. But then came the gloves, soft doe skin lined with rabbit fur, left by her wash basin. Then a shawl of good wool, deep blue like the evening sky, folded on her chair. Small gifts, practical things, but chosen with such care that they made her chest ache. Eleanor reciprocated in her own way. She began leaving an extra biscuit on his breakfast plate, still warm from the oven. She embroidered his initials on his handkerchiefs with thread she'd unraveled from her own worn petticoat. She placed sprigs of dried lavender in his dresser drawers when she collected his washing. Neither acknowledged these exchanges, but the air between them grew thick with unspoken words. The accident happened on a clear March morning. Samuel had been working to repair the barn roof, and Eleanor was hanging wash on the line. She heard the crash, wood splintering, a sharp cry of pain, and then silence. She found him crumpled on the ground beside the barn, his face white with pain, blood seeping through his trouser leg where a jagged board had torn through fabric and flesh. The latter lay in pieces nearby. "Don't," he gritted out as she knelt beside him. But Eleanor was already tearing strips from her apron. "Be quiet," she said, her hands steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. She bound the wound tightly, helped him stand, took his weight across her shoulders. He was heavier than she'd expected, solid muscle and bone, and the journey back to the house seemed endless. Inside, she settled him in a chair and set about properly tending the wound. It was deep but clean, missing the major vessels by Providence alone. She heated water, gathered clean cloth, found the whiskey. "This will hurt," she warned. "Already does," he managed, then sucked in a sharp breath as she began cleaning the wound. His hand shot out, gripping hers where it rested on his knee. She froze, expecting him to push her away. Instead, he held on, his calloused palm warm against hers. As she worked, she could feel the tremors running through him, the effort it took not to cry out. When she'd finished bandaging the leg, she realized they were still holding hands. She looked up to find him watching her, his gray eyes dark with something that wasn't just pain. "Eleanor," he said hoarsely. "You need rest," she said quickly, starting to pull away, but his grip tightened. "No, listen." He struggled upright, wincing. "When I saw you that first day, what I saw wasn't what others see." Her throat closed. "You don't need to." "I saw strength," he continued, inexorable as the prairie wind. "I saw someone who'd survive the unsurvivable. I saw—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "I saw someone who might understand." "Understand what?" His free hand moved to his chest, where his shirt lay open at the collar. Slowly, he pulled the fabric aside, revealing a network of scars that rivaled her own, not from fever, but from violence. Bullet wounds, knife marks, the kind of damage that came from war or worse. "Got these in Kansas, during the Troubles," he said quietly. "Border wars, things I did, things done to me. They said I was a hero when I came home, but heroes don't wake up screaming. Heroes don't spend years afraid of their own shadows." Eleanor's eyes burned with unshed tears. Without thinking, she reached out and traced one particularly vicious scar with her fingertip. Samuel shuddered but didn't pull away. "We're a pair, aren't we?" she whispered. "The beast and the beauty. Only we can't figure out which is which." Something broke in his expression then. "You're not a beast. God, Eleanor, don't you know? When you think I'm not looking, when you forget to hide, you're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." The words hung between them. Irretrievable. Eleanor felt exposed, flayed open, every defense crumbling. "I'm so tired," she admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep. "So tired of hiding, of being ashamed, of apologizing for existing." "Then don't," Samuel said fiercely. "Not here, not with me." The dam broke. Eleanor sobbed. Great, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. 3 years of grief and shame and loneliness pouring out in a flood. Samuel pulled her against him, mindless of his injured leg, and held her while she wept. His hand stroked her hair, her scarred face pressed against his scarred chest. 2 damaged souls clinging to each other in the wreckage of their lives. When the storm passed, Eleanor found herself in Samuel's lap, his arms still around her, her face tucked into the curve of his neck. She should have been mortified, should have leapt up and fled. Instead, she breathed in the scent of him and felt something she'd thought lost forever. "Safe. Stay," he murmured into her hair. "Just for a moment. Let me pretend." "Pretend what?" "That I deserve this. That a man who's done what I've done could deserve to hold something good." Eleanor pulled back enough to see his face. "We don't get to decide what we deserve," she said softly. "If we did, I'd have died with the fever. Maybe we just get to choose what we do with what's left." Samuel's hand came up to cup her scarred cheek with impossible gentleness. "And what do you choose?" "This," she whispered, and kissed him. It was awkward at first. Neither had kissed anyone in years, and there was too much emotion, too much need. But then Samuel's hand slid into her hair, angling her head, and Eleanor made a soft sound of surprise as the kiss deepened, became something else entirely. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Eleanor's lips felt swollen, alive. Samuel's eyes were wide, almost shocked. He started. "Your leg," Eleanor said quickly, reality crashing back. "You need to rest. I'll help you to your room." But as she helped him stand, supported him down the hall, she knew something fundamental had changed. The careful distance, the protective walls. They lay in ruins around their feet. At his door, Samuel caught her hand once more. "Eleanor, what happens now?" She looked at him, this broken, gentle man who saw her truly and didn't flinch. "I don't know," she admitted. "But maybe Maybe we find out together." He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her work-roughened palm. Together, he agreed. That night, Eleanor lay in her narrow bed, touching her lips in wonder. Outside her window, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas below. But for the first time in 3 years, Eleanor didn't feel small. She felt possible. And in his room, Samuel sat on the edge of his bed, testing his bandaged leg and thinking of scarred hands gentle on his skin, of understanding in brown eyes, of the miracle of being truly seen and not found wanting. The house settled around them, wood creaking in the cold, and 2 hearts beat in synchrony through the walls, waiting for morning and whatever came next. The days that followed existed in a strange suspension, like the moment between lightning and thunder. Eleanor and Samuel moved around each other with exquisite care, aware that something precious and fragile had bloomed between them, afraid that too sudden a movement might shatter it. Samuel's leg healed slowly. Eleanor tended it each morning and evening, her hands clinical and careful, though the air crackled between them every time she touched his skin. He would watch her face as she worked, memorizing the way she bit her lower lip in concentration, how the morning light caught in her brown hair. They began to talk during these sessions, tentative at first, then with growing ease. Samuel spoke of his childhood in Missouri, before the wars came, a small farm, parents who loved each other, Sunday dinners with too many cousins to count. The memories seemed to surprise him, as if he'd forgotten such sweetness had ever existed in his life. Eleanor shared her own carefully hoarded memories. Her father teaching her letters by lamplight, her mother's garden, riots of color against the gray Pennsylvania coal town, the young man who'd courted her before James, who'd written poetry and brought her wildflowers, who'd died of pneumonia the winter before she married. "I settled for James," she admitted one evening, wrapping fresh bandages around Samuel's calf. "My parents were gone. I had no trade, no prospects. He seemed stable, respectable. I thought that would be enough." "Was it?" Samuel asked quietly. "For a time, before the fever. He was not unkind, distant, perhaps. More interested in his horses than his wife, but many men are like that." She secured the bandage, kept her eyes down. "After, he couldn't bear to look at me, said I'd tricked him, married him under false pretenses, as if I'd chosen to get sick." Samuel's hand covered hers where it rested on his knee. "His failing, not yours. I know that here." Eleanor touched her temple. "But here," she placed her hand over her heart. "Here, I still wonder if he was right, if I am cursed, if everyone I touch is tainted by association. Look at me." She raised her eyes reluctantly. Samuel's face was serious, intent. "I've been alone for 6 years," he said. "By choice, mostly. After Kansas, after what I did there, I figured loneliness was my penance. Better to keep my poison to myself." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Then you arrived. And for the first time in 6 years, this house feels like something more than a tomb. Samuel, I dream about you." The words came out rough, urgent. "Every night, not improper dreams, or not just those." A flush crept up his neck. "I dream of ordinary things. You singing in the kitchen, us reading by the fire, waking up and knowing you're near. Small things, impossible things." Eleanor's eyes burned. "They're not impossible." "Aren't they? You work for me. You're dependent on my goodwill for the roof over your head. How can we?" She understood his dilemma. The same thoughts had tormented her. In the eyes of the world, she was his servant, little better than property. Any advance from him would be seen as exploitation, no matter how willing she might be. "Then change it," she said suddenly. "What?" "Change the arrangement. I have a little money saved, not much, but some. Let me pay rent for my room, buy my own food. Then I'm a boarder, not a servant. Then we're equals, as much as we can be." Samuel stared at her. "You'd want that, to stay here, Even if you weren't obligated? Where else would I go? Eleanor asked simply. This is home now. You're... She stopped, unable to finish. I'm what? You're home too, she whispered. Samuel made a sound low in his throat and pulled her to him. This kiss was different from their first, less desperate, more certain. Eleanor melted against him, her hands tangling in his hair, feeling the heat of him through his shirt. When his tongue touched hers, she gasped, and he swallowed the sound like a man dying of thirst. They broke apart when the need for air became urgent. Samuel's eyes were dark, his breathing ragged. Eleanor, God, what you do to me. Show me, she breathed against his mouth. Please, I'm so tired of being afraid to feel. He stood, favoring his injured leg, and drew her up with him. Are you certain? Once we cross this line, we've already crossed it. Eleanor said, The moment you looked at me and saw something more than scars, the moment I stopped being invisible, we crossed it, Samuel. The only question is whether we're brave enough to keep walking. In answer, he led her to his room. Eleanor had cleaned this space countless times, but now she saw it differently. The narrow bed where he slept, the shaving mirror where he faced himself each morning, the window where he stood to watch her in the garden. Samuel lit the lamp with shaking hands, then turned to her. I need to tell you something first, about Kansas, about what I did. You don't have to. Yes, I do. You should know who you're choosing. He sat on the edge of the bed, and Eleanor settled beside him. In the lamplight, his scars seemed deeper, shadows pooling in the damaged tissue. I rode with a militia group, started out defending settlements from raiders, ended up becoming raiders ourselves. The things we did in the name of justice. He closed his eyes. There was a family, Southern sympathizers. We were told we burned them out. The children... His voice broke. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5, same age as my nephew back home. Eleanor took his hand, held it tight. After that, I left. Came here, as far from Kansas as I could get. Been hiding ever since. From the law, from God, from myself. He looked at her, raw anguish in his eyes. That's who I am. Eleanor, a man who burned children out of their homes. Still want to cross that line? Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, processing this confession. Then she spoke, choosing her words carefully. The man who did those things, is he the same man who leaves me fresh water every morning? Who carved me a comb with his own hands? Who held me while I wept? I don't know, Samuel said honestly. I hope not, but I can't be certain. None of us can be certain who we are until we're tested. Eleanor said, I thought I knew who I was, James Whitman's wife, a respectable woman. Then the fever came, and I learned I was someone who could endure cruelty, who could survive being hated, who could go on living when everything inside me wanted to stop. She touched his face. Maybe we're not who we were. Maybe we're who we're becoming. Samuel turned his face into her palm, kissed the center of it. What are we becoming then? Let's find out, she whispered. What followed was a careful exploration. 2 damaged people learning to trust their bodies again. Samuel's hands shook as he unpinned her hair, letting it fall in dark waves around her shoulders. Eleanor's fingers trembled on the buttons of his shirt, revealing the map of violence written on his skin. They moved slowly, gently, each touch a question, each kiss an answer. When Samuel traced the scars on her face with infinite tenderness, Eleanor wept. When she pressed her lips to each mark on his chest, he shuddered like a man in fever. Beautiful, he murmured against her throat. So beautiful it breaks my heart. They came together with sighs rather than passion, holding each other as if they might disappear. The intimacy was almost too much, skin against skin, breath mingling with breath, hearts beating in desperate synchrony. Eleanor had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, so utterly safe. Afterwards, they lay entwined, neither willing to allow even an inch of space between them. Samuel's hand stroked her hair, while Eleanor traced patterns on his chest, both marveling at the simple miracle of touch without shame. "What happens tomorrow?" Eleanor asked into the darkness. "We wake up," Samuel said simply, "together. And then the next day, and the next, until waking up together seems normal, until we forget there was ever a time we woke alone. The world won't understand. They'll call me worse than fallen. They'll call you a fool. Let 'em." His arms tightened around her. "I've been called worse. And you've survived worse. What's a few more words compared to this?" Eleanor lifted herself on one elbow to look at him. In the moonlight through the window, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were clear. "You really think we can do this? Build something real out of all this damage?" "I think," Samuel said slowly, "that broken things can be mended. Not made new. Maybe the cracks still show. But sometimes the mending makes them stronger than they were before." He touched her face. "I think we're both tired of being broken alone." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, settling back against him. "I'm tired of alone." They slept then, curled into each other like question marks finding their answers. Outside, the prairie wind sang its endless song, and the stars wheeled overhead, and two hearts that had given up on happiness learned to beat in time. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in late spring, carried by a rider who didn't stay long enough for coffee. Eleanor found it tucked under the door, her name written in Martha Briggs's spiteful hand. Her stomach turned to lead as she broke the seal. "Eleanor," Samuel called from the barn where he was tending a sick calf. "Everything all right?" She couldn't answer. The words swam before her eyes. Each line another bar in a cage she'd thought she'd escaped. "Your period of service was agreed upon as indefinite until debts are satisfied, as James's widow. You remain property of the Briggs family under territorial law. You will return immediately or face legal consequences. Furthermore, Mr. Aldrich has agreed to take you as his wife, a generous offer considering your condition. The marriage will settle all obligations." Eleanor's hands shook. Josiah Aldrich, 60 years old, 3 wives in the ground, with hands that wandered and breath that stank of rotting teeth. She'd served at his table once during a harvest gathering, felt his fingers accidentally brush places they shouldn't. "Eleanor." Samuel stood in the doorway now, concern creasing his face. These past 2 months had softened him, smoothed some of the harsh edges. He smiled more, slept better, had even started talking about expanding the vegetable garden. They'd built something precious and fragile, something that felt like forever. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. His face went through several transformations as he read. Confusion, understanding, then a cold fury she'd never seen before. "Like hell," he said quietly. "Like hell they'll take you. They have the law. I don't give a damn about their law." He crumpled the letter, threw it in the fireplace. "You're not property. You're not going back. Samuel, be reasonable. If they bring the territorial marshals, then we'll deal with that when it comes." He crossed to her, took her face in his hands. "Do you want to go back? Do you want to marry Aldrich? You know I don't. But wanting and having are different things. We both know that." "Not this time." His thumb stroked her cheeks. "This time, we fight for what we want." But fighting, Eleanor knew, could cost him everything. If he harbored her against legal claim, he could lose his ranch, face imprisonment. She'd destroyed one man's life simply by existing. She wouldn't do it again. That night, while Samuel slept, she packed her meager belongings. Better to go quietly, spare him the consequences of defying the Briggs family. She'd survive Aldrich somehow. She'd survived worse. She made it as far as the porch before Samuel's voice stopped her. "Going somewhere?" He sat in the shadows, fully dressed, as if he'd been waiting. "I knew you'd run. That self-sacrificing streak will be the death of you." "Woman." "I won't let them destroy you because of me. And I won't let them take you. Seems we're at an impasse." He stood, moved into the moonlight. Unless what? Unless we change the game entirely, make their claim invalid. Eleanor's heart stuttered. How? Marry me. The words hung between them like stars. Bright, impossible, unreachable. Samuel, a husband's claim supersedes all others under territorial law. Marry me, and the Briggs family has no power over you. He stepped closer. I know it's not. I know you deserve better than a rushed ceremony to avoid worse. But Eleanor, Yes, he blinked. Yes? Did you think I'd refuse? Did you think I care about ceremonies and white dresses? She laughed, slightly hysterical. Samuel Murphy, I would marry you in a feed store wearing burlap if it meant staying with you. He kissed her then, fierce and desperate, and Eleanor tasted promise in it. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. We'll leave at first light. There's a justice of the peace in Millfield. 2 days' ride. We can be married by Thursday. The Briggs family will follow. Let them, by the time they arrive. You'll be my wife. They can howl at the moon for all I care. They prepared quickly, efficiently. Samuel readied the wagon while Eleanor packed food and essentials. She wore her better dress, still black, but less worn. He'd shaved and put on his church clothes, such as they were. In the pre-dawn darkness, they looked like what they were, 2 people running toward something rather than away. The journey to Millfield passed in a blur of dust and determination. They stopped only when necessary, always watching the horizon for riders. At night, they slept in the wagon bed. Eleanor curled against Samuel's chest, listening to his heartbeat and marveling that soon that heart would be hers by law, as it already was by choice. Millfield appeared on the second afternoon, a scrappy collection of buildings that called itself a town by virtue of having both a saloon and a church, the Justice of the Peace. Judge Morrison was a thin man with kind eyes who asked no questions beyond the legal requirements. Do you take this woman of your own free will? He asked Samuel. More freely than I've ever done anything. Samuel replied, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. And you, miss? Do you take this man without coercion? I take him with my whole heart. Eleanor said. The ceremony was brief, witnessed by Morrison's wife and a traveling tinker who happened to be passing through. No flowers, no music, no guests in fine clothes, but when Morrison pronounced them man and wife, when Samuel kissed her with trembling lips, Eleanor felt more blessed than any society bride in silk and pearls. They were signing the certificate when the door burst open. Marcus Briggs stood there, trail dusty and furious, 2 hired men flanking him. Stop this farce immediately, he commanded. That woman is bound by law. That woman is my wife, Samuel interrupted calmly, turning to face them. As of 5 minutes ago, Marcus's face went purple. You can't. She's property of... I'm no one's property, Eleanor said, stepping forward. For the first time in 3 years, she felt no urge to hide her face, to make herself small. I'm Eleanor Murphy, and I choose where I belong. The debt? What debt? Samuel pulled out a leather purse, threw it at Marcus's feet. There's $50, more than enough to cover room and board for a few months' work, unless you'd like to itemize other expenses. I'm sure Judge Morrison would be interested in how you've been treating widows in your family. Morrison, who'd been watching with interest, stepped forward. Is there a legal issue here, gentlemen? Because I'll remind you that interfering with a lawful marriage is a serious matter. Marcus looked between them all, calculating. The hired men shifted nervously. They'd been paid to retrieve a runaway servant, not challenge a legal marriage backed by a judge. This isn't over. Marcus snarled finally. You've made a fool's bargain, Murphy. When you realize what you've saddled yourself with, I've saddled myself with the best woman in the territory. Samuel said quietly, and if you speak one more word against my wife, we'll settle this in a way that doesn't involve judges. Something in his voice, that cold danger that spoke of Kansas and violence, made Marcus step back, with a final venomous look at Eleanor. He turned and stalked out, his men trailing behind. Eleanor sagged against Samuel, trembling. It's done. It's done, Judge Morrison confirmed, handing them the signed certificate. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Murphy. May I suggest you spend tonight in town? Mrs. Morrison runs a clean boarding house, and it might be wise to let certain tempers cool before traveling." They took his advice, spending their wedding night in a small but clean room above the general store. As Eleanor unpinned her hair, she caught sight of them in the mirror, Samuel sitting on the bed, watching her with such naked adoration it took her breath away. "Regrets?" she asked softly. He stood, came to stand behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. "Only that I didn't marry you the day you arrived," he said. "Would have saved us both some trouble." Eleanor turned in his arms. "I wasn't ready then. Neither were you. We needed time to see past our own damage. And now I see my husband," she said simply. "The man who fought for me, who chose me, who sees me truly and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," Samuel corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple, her cheek, the corner of her mouth. "Because of, I love your strength, your kindness, your terrible coffee." "My coffee is not terrible. It's awful." He grinned against her skin. "But you make it with such determination." "I love your courage, your gentleness with the animals, the way you hum when you think no one's listening." His voice dropped. "I love your scars because they're proof you survived. I love your body because it's yours. I love your heart because it learned to trust me when it had every reason not to." Eleanor was crying now, but they were clean tears, healing tears. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it terrifies me sometimes." "Then we'll be terrified together," Samuel said, and kissed her properly. Later, as they lay entwined in the narrow bed, Eleanor traced lazy patterns on her husband's chest. "What now?" "Now we go home," Samuel said. "We plant that expanded garden. We raise horses and vegetables and maybe children. If we're blessed, we wake up together every morning and go to bed together every night. We live, Eleanor, for the first time in years. We actually live." Outside their window, Millfield settled into sleep. Tomorrow would bring the journey home, the challenge of building a life together, the inevitable struggles of two damaged people learning to be whole. But tonight, in this small room above a general store, Samuel and Eleanor Murphy held each other and believed in forever. And somewhere in the darkness, the certificate that bound them lay on the dresser, ink still fresh on the paper, legal proof of what their hearts had known all along, that broken things, mended with love, could indeed become stronger than before. The journey home felt different than their flight to Millfield, where before there had been urgency and fear. Now there was a quiet contentment, a sense of returning to something rather than escaping from it. Eleanor sat beside Samuel on the wagon seat, their shoulders touching, her hand occasionally finding his. They spoke of simple things, plans for the ranch, what vegetables to plant, whether to buy more chickens. But beneath the ordinary words ran a deeper current, the miracle of we instead of I, the luxury of planning a future together. As they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view, Eleanor felt her throat tighten. Home, their home. "Look," Samuel said softly, pointing to the porch. "Someone's been here." Fresh flowers stood in a jar by the door, wild flowers and prairie roses, tied with a piece of gingham. A basket sat beside them, covered with a clean cloth. Eleanor climbed down and lifted the cloth carefully. Fresh bread, a jar of preserves, a small crock of butter. A note was tucked between the items, written in a careful hand. "Heard the news from Millfield. About time. Samuel Murphy. Welcome to the neighborhood proper. Mrs. Murphy." Sarah Henderson. Sarah Henderson? Eleanor looked at Samuel in confusion. "Owns the spread 5 miles south. Her husband died last winter. I helped her bring in her harvest." He looked uncomfortable. Didn't think anyone around here cared. But as they unloaded the wagon, they found more evidence of caring. The garden had been weeded. Fresh water had been drawn. Someone had even repaired a broken board on the porch steps. The tinker, Eleanor realized suddenly, the one who witnessed our wedding, he must have ridden ahead, spread the word. Over the following days, neighbors Eleanor had never known existed began to appear. Women who'd kept their distance when she was the Briggs family's servant now brought wedding gifts. Practical things, mostly. Needles and thread, seeds for the garden, a laying hen, recipes written on precious paper. "I remember when I first married," said Mary Parsons, a weathered woman with kind eyes. "Terrifying, isn't it? Having something good to lose?" Eleanor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Gets easier," Mary assured her. "The fear never quite goes away, but it gets quieter, and what you build together, it's worth the risk." Samuel, too, found his isolation crumbling. Men who'd respected his need for solitude now included him in conversations about cattle prices and weather patterns. They spoke to him differently now, not as the dangerous loner, but as a married man, a part of the community fabric. One evening, as Eleanor served supper to visiting neighbors, she caught Samuel watching her with an expression of such wonder that she nearly dropped the coffee pot. Later, after their guests had gone, he pulled her onto his lap by the fire. "Do you know what you've done?" he asked, his voice rough. 6 years I lived here like a ghost. Then you arrived, and suddenly, I'm alive again." "We're alive. We saved each other," Eleanor corrected, resting her head against his shoulder. "That's what marriage is, isn't it? Choosing to save each other every day." But their newfound happiness couldn't shield them from all troubles. Word of their marriage had spread beyond the well-meaning neighbors, and not everyone was pleased. The first sign of trouble came when Samuel went to town for supplies. Eleanor had stayed home, tending to a sick calf, but she knew something was wrong the moment he returned. His face was closed, his movements sharp with suppressed anger. "What happened?" "Nothing that matters." But he wouldn't meet her eyes. She found out the truth from Sarah Henderson, who visited the next day. "That awful Josiah Aldrich has been spreading poison," Sarah said bluntly. "Says Samuel took advantage of a simple-minded woman, that the marriage isn't proper. Says you're both living in sin." Eleanor felt the familiar burn of shame, but it was quickly replaced by fury. "How dare he? Oh, most folks aren't listening," Sarah assured her. "Anyone with eyes can see how you two are together, but Aldrich has influence with certain people. The bank, for instance." The meaning sank in slowly. The bank that held the note on Samuel's ranch, the bank that could call in loans at will. "We'll manage," Eleanor said firmly. "We've faced worse." But as days passed, the pressure mounted. Their credit at the general store was suddenly under review. The farrier found himself too busy to shoe Samuel's horses. Small cuts, each one bearable alone, but together they formed a pattern of exclusion. Samuel grew quieter, and Eleanor recognized the signs. He was retreating into himself, preparing for loss. One night, she found him sitting on the porch, staring into the darkness. "Don't," she said simply. "Don't what?" "Don't start thinking you've ruined my life. Don't convince yourself I'd be better off without you. Don't you dare give up on us." He looked at her then, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. "How do you know what I'm thinking?" "Because I know you," Eleanor said, settling beside him. "Because I've had the same thoughts. But Samuel, they're lies. What we have, it's worth fighting for. Even if we lose the ranch, we won't lose the ranch. But if we do," Eleanor took his hand, laced their fingers together. "Then we'll find another piece of land. We'll start over. We'll build something new, as long as we're together. The rest is just details." Samuel pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "I don't deserve you." "Stop that," Eleanor said firmly. "We've had enough of what we deserve. We chose each other, remember? That's all that matters." The next morning brought an unexpected ally. Judge Morrison himself arrived, dusty from the road but bearing good news. "Thought you should know," he said, accepting a cup of Eleanor's much-improved coffee. "I've been doing some checking on this Aldrich fellow. Seems he's been playing fast and loose with property laws himself. That third wife of his, her family's been asking questions about their inheritance. Might be Mr. Aldrich should worry about his own affairs instead of meddling in yours. Why would you do this for us? Eleanor asked. Morrison smiled. I've married a lot of couples in my time. Mrs. Murphy, you develop an instinct for which ones will last. You two, the way you looked at each other during the ceremony, well, let's just say I have a vested interest in seeing love win out over spite. His investigation bore fruit quickly. Within a week, Aldrich found himself facing serious questions about missing funds from his late wife's estate. His campaign against the Murphys ceased abruptly as he scrambled to defend himself. Sometimes justice has a sense of humor. Samuel murmured when they heard the news, but Eleanor was more interested in something else Morrison had said. That night, as they lay in bed, she broached the subject that had been growing in her heart. Samuel, what Morrison said about couples that last, do you think we will last? I mean, he was quiet for so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, my parents were married 43 years. I asked my father once how they'd managed it. You know what he said? Eleanor shook her head against his chest. He said, Son, marriage isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours. I didn't understand then. I do now. Our imperfections fit? Eleanor asked, smiling in the darkness. Like puzzle pieces. Samuel confirmed. Your scars, my shadows, your tendency to sacrifice yourself, my tendency to isolate, separately, their weaknesses, together. He paused, searching for words. Together, they're just part of our story. Eleanor rose up to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they broke apart, she had one more question. Do you want children, Samuel? His hands stilled on her back. Do you? I didn't think I did. Didn't think I had the right, looking like this. Didn't want to pass on whatever curse. She stopped, took a breath. But now I think maybe it wasn't a curse. Maybe it was just life, hard and unfair, but survivable. And if we could teach a child to be strong like us, to see past surfaces, to choose love despite the risk. Yes, Samuel said simply. Yes to all of it. Yes to babies with your eyes and my stubbornness. Yes to teaching them to be brave and kind and true. Yes to building a family out of all this broken pieces we've collected. They made love then with a new tenderness, a new purpose, and when Eleanor lay afterwards, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, she wondered if perhaps their child was already on its way, begun in those first desperate nights when they'd reached for each other like drowning souls finding shore. Outside, the prairie wind sang its eternal song. The ranch house, once a tomb for one man's isolation, now sheltered a marriage, a hope, a future being written one day at a time, and in the darkness, two hearts beat in synchrony, no longer broken but whole, no longer alone but home. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the ranch as Eleanor stood in the doorway, one hand pressed to her rounded belly, watching Samuel work with a yearling in the corral. 6 months had passed since their wedding. 6 months of building a life stitch by careful stitch. You shouldn't be on your feet so much. Sarah Henderson called from the porch where she was shelling beans. The older woman had become a regular visitor, a source of advice and companionship Eleanor hadn't known she needed. I'm pregnant, not invalid, Eleanor replied, but she moved to sit beside her friend. The baby shifted inside her, a rolling movement that still took her breath away. First one's always the hardest, Sarah said knowingly, the not knowing what to expect. But you're strong. You'll do fine. Eleanor wasn't so sure. The pregnancy had been difficult, morning sickness that lasted all day, fatigue that seemed to pull her under like deep water. But worse than the physical discomfort was the fear that crept in during quiet moments. What if the baby inherited her scars? What if she wasn't capable of the kind of love a child needed? I can hear you worrying from here, Samuel said. Appearing at her side, he was dusty from work, smelling of horses and honest sweat, and Eleanor leaned into him gratefully. Can't help it, she admitted. Yes, you can. He pressed a kiss to her temple. One day at a time. Remember, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to be present. But being present became increasingly difficult as Eleanor's time approached. The winter came early and harsh. November bringing snows that isolated the ranch for days at a time. Samuel had to work twice as hard to keep the animals fed and sheltered, often returning to the house exhausted and half frozen. One particularly brutal night, with the wind howling like a living thing. Eleanor woke to find the bed empty beside her. She found Samuel in the main room, standing at the window, his shoulders rigid with tension. "What is it?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around herself. "Nothing. Go back to bed." But she knew him too well now to be dismissed. Moving closer, she saw what had caught his attention. Fresh tracks in the snow, too regular to be animal. "Someone's been watching the house," he said quietly. "Third time this week." Eleanor's blood chilled. The Briggs family? Maybe, or Aldrich's people. He lost his case, had to pay restitution. Might be looking for someone to blame. "What do we do?" Samuel turned to her, his face grave. "I want you to stay with Sarah until after the baby comes. It's safer." "No. Eleanor, no." She gripped his arms, felt the tension thrumming through him. "We don't separate. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what we promised." He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled her against him. "Stubborn woman. You knew that when you married me." The watching continued for another week. Footprints in the snow. The occasional glimpse of a rider on the horizon. Samuel took to wearing his pistol even for barn chores, and Eleanor kept the shotgun within reach. The strain showed on both their faces. Dark circles and sharp words quickly apologized for. Then, on a night when the moon was new and the darkness complete, they came. Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke. "Fire!" She shook Samuel urgently. "Something's burning!" They stumbled from bed to find the barn ablaze, flames already licking at the roof. The horses were screaming. Trapped inside. "Stay here," Samuel commanded, grabbing his coat. "Like hell," Eleanor shot back, pulling on her boots despite her ungainly size. Together they raced to the barn. Samuel threw open the doors, smoke billowing out in black clouds. Without hesitation, he plunged inside. Eleanor grabbed lead ropes from the fence, ready to help guide the panicked animals to safety, one by one. Samuel led them out, Tempest, wild-eyed and fighting. The mares, whinnying in terror, the new foal, carried in Samuel's arms like a child. Eleanor guided them to the corral, her heart pounding, the baby kicking frantically as if sensing the danger. "That's all of them," Samuel gasped, emerging from the smoke. His face was black with soot, his coat singed. That's when they heard the laughter. 3 men stood silhouetted against the burning barn. Eleanor recognized Marcus Briggs despite the bandana covering the lower half of his face. "Shame about your barn. Murphy," Marcus called. "Accidents happen out here. Might be more accidents if you don't see sense." "That woman brings bad luck wherever she goes." "The only bad luck here is you," Samuel said, his voice deadly calm. "Get off my land." "Or what? You'll shoot us? 3 against 1. 2, Eleanor corrected, raising the shotgun she'd grabbed on their way out. 3, if you count the baby I'm carrying. Want to murder a pregnant woman? Marcus? How will that look to your respectable family?" Even in the firelight, she could see him pale, whatever his plans. They hadn't included facing an armed, heavily pregnant woman. "This isn't over," he snarled, but he was already backing away, his companions with him. "Yes, it is," Samuel said. "You come near my family again, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. Briggs, that's a promise from a man who's done it before and will do it again to protect what's his." They watched the men ride away, then turned to face their burning barn. The structure was beyond saving, but the animals were safe, huddled together in the corral. "We'll rebuild," Eleanor said quietly. "With what?" Samuel's voice was bitter. "They knew exactly what would hurt us most. Without the barn, we can't shelter the animals properly. We'll lose half the herd this winter." Eleanor set down the shotgun and took his soot-stained face in her hands. "Then we'll start small. We'll rebuild 1 stall at a time if we have to. We've done it before. Samuel, started from nothing. You're about to have a baby. I need my husband to remember who we are. Eleanor interrupted. We're survivors, both of us. This is just another scar. Another story to tell our child about how their parents never gave up. Samuel stared at her, his brave, fierce wife standing in her nightgown and boots. Stomach round with their child, face set with determination, and felt something break and remake itself in his chest. I love you, he said helplessly. God help me. I love you more than life. Then live, Eleanor said simply. Live and fight and rebuild. Show them they can't break us. The next morning brought unexpected hope. Word of the fire had spread. Sarah Henderson had seen the glow from her place and raised the alarm. By noon, wagons began arriving. Neighbors, some Eleanor had never met, came bearing lumber, nails, tools, and willing hands. Heard you had some trouble, Tom Garrett said, spitting tobacco juice and rolling up his sleeves. Can't abide arsonists. Man's barn is sacred out here. They worked through the day and into the night. A dozen men and women laboring side by side. Eleanor, banned from heavy work, coordinated food and coffee, her heart full to bursting at this display of community. Why? She asked Mary Parsons during a quiet moment. Some of these people barely know us. Mary smiled. Because we've all been where you are, one way or another. Out here, we take care of our own. And you two, you're ours now. By sunset 3 days later, a new barn stood where the old had burned. Smaller, perhaps, but solid and true. The animals were sheltered, the hay stores protected, the future secured. That night, as Eleanor and Samuel stood looking at what their neighbors had helped them build, the first labor pains began. Samuel, Eleanor gasped, gripping his arm. I think it's time. His face went white. Now, but we're not. Babies don't wait for convenient timing. Eleanor managed through gritted teeth. Get Sarah. Hurry. The hours that followed blurred together, pain like nothing Eleanor had ever experienced. Samuel's hand crushed in hers, Sarah's calm voice guiding her through each wave. The storm outside seemed to echo her labor. Wind and snow battering the windows as she fought to bring their child into the world. I can't, she sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond measure. I can't do this. Yes, you can, Samuel said fiercely. You're the strongest person I know. You survived the fever, survived the Briggs family, survived everything life threw at you. You can do this. One more push, Sarah urged. Just one more. Eleanor, your baby's almost here. With a cry that seemed to come from her very soul. Eleanor pushed one final time, and then, cutting through the storm's howl, came a different sound, the indignant wail of a newborn. A girl, Sarah announced, cleaning the baby quickly and placing her on Eleanor's chest. A perfect, healthy girl. Eleanor stared down at her daughter through tears. The baby was red and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. She's beautiful, Samuel breathed, touching the baby's tiny fist with one trembling finger. Just like her mother. What will you call her? Sarah asked, bustling about with practiced efficiency. Eleanor looked at Samuel, saw her own thought reflected in his eyes. Hope, she said softly. Hope Eleanor Murphy. Because that's what she is. Hope that beauty comes from ashes. Hope that love is stronger than hate. Hope for the future we're building. Samuel kissed his wife's forehead, then his daughter's, tears running freely down his face. Hope, he agreed. Our little miracle. Outside, the storm began to quiet, and the first rays of dawn painted the snow-covered land in shades of gold and pink. Inside the house that had seen so much sorrow, a family held each other close, scarred but whole, tested but unbroken, bound by love that had proved stronger than all the darkness the world could offer, and in her mother's arms. Hope. Eleanor Murphy opened her eyes and gazed at her parents with perfect trust, as if she knew she had been born from courage and into love, a child of survivors who would teach her that the strongest hearts were often those that had been broken and mended with gold. 1 year later, spring painted the prairie in shades of green and gold. Eleanor stood in the garden, hope balanced on her hip, watching Samuel work with a new colt. The baby babbled happily, reaching chubby hands toward the horses, and Eleanor smiled at her daughter's fearlessness. "She's got your courage," Samuel called out, leading the colt in a slow circle. "And your stubbornness," Eleanor replied, shifting hope to her other hip. The child was growing fast, already pulling herself up on furniture, determined to explore every corner of their world. The past year had brought changes beyond their wildest hopes. The new barn stood strong, expanded now to accommodate their growing herd. The garden flourished under Eleanor's care, providing enough vegetables to sell at market. Most surprisingly, Samuel had begun training horses for other ranchers, his gentle methods earning respect and steady income. Letter came, Sarah Henderson announced, walking up from the main road. She'd taken to collecting their mail on her trips to town, sparing them encounters with those who still harbored ill will. "Looks official." Eleanor's stomach tightened as she recognized the legal seal. With trembling hands, she opened it. Samuel coming to read over her shoulder. Notice of inheritance. The estate of James Whitman, deceased, having been settled. The following assets are hereby released to his widow, Eleanor Whitman Murphy. Eleanor had to read it twice before the words sank in. James's uncle in Philadelphia had died, leaving everything to his only nephew. With James gone and no other heirs, it all came to her. Not a fortune, but enough to secure their future. "There's a certain justice in that," Samuel murmured. "After everything they put you through." But Eleanor's eyes were on the second page, a letter from the lawyer, explaining that Martha Briggs had tried to claim the inheritance, insisting Eleanor had forfeited her rights. The court had disagreed, ruling that marriage to Samuel had freed her from any obligations to the Briggs family. "It's over," Eleanor whispered. "Truly over." That evening, they celebrated quietly, a special dinner. Hope in her high chair smearing mashed carrots across her face. Samuel and Eleanor sharing glances over the table like newlyweds. After the baby was asleep, they sat on the porch, watching the stars emerge. "What will we do with the money?" Samuel asked. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. "Save most of it, for Hope's education, for lean years, but—" She paused, an idea forming. "What if we used some to help other women? Women like I was, trapped by circumstance, scarred by life." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "A refuge. A chance," Eleanor corrected. "A place to heal, to learn skills, to remember they're human beings worthy of respect. Sarah would help. She's mentioned other women in difficult situations." "The Widow Whitman Fund," Samuel said slowly, testing the words. "James would hate that." "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "Let some good come from his name." As spring turned to summer, their plans took shape. They converted the old bunkhouse into a small but comfortable cottage. Word spread carefully, quietly. Sarah and Mary Parsons knew who to tell, which women needed help most desperately. The first to arrive was Annie Carver, barely 18, pregnant and abandoned by a traveling salesman. Her family had cast her out, calling her ruined. She stood on their doorstep like Eleanor once had, hopeless, ashamed, prepared for cruelty. Instead, she found Eleanor, Hope on her hip, smiling warmly. "Welcome. Annie, come in. You're safe here." Over the following months, others came. Margaret, escaping a violent husband. Rose, disfigured in a fire and unable to find work. Catherine, aged out of an orphanage with nowhere to go. Each woman brought her own pain, her own story, her own strength waiting to be rediscovered. Eleanor taught them what she knew: cooking, gardening, mending. Samuel offered lessons in animal husbandry and basic carpentry. Sarah instructed them in midwifery and herbal remedies. Most importantly, they offered dignity, respect, the radical notion that these women deserved good lives. Not everyone approved. There were mutterings in town about the Murphy Ranch becoming a haven for fallen women. Some merchants refused their business, but support came from unexpected quarters. Judge Morrison publicly endorsed their work, and several ranchers' wives began donating supplies. One autumn afternoon, as Eleanor worked in the garden with several of the women, she noticed a rider approaching. Her blood chilled as she recognized Marcus Briggs, but this time he came alone, his posture defeated rather than threatening. "Mrs. Murphy," he said, removing his hat. "I've come to—" "That is, my mother sent me." Eleanor stood, hope toddling at her feet. What does Martha want? Marcus seemed to age before her eyes. "She's dying. The cancer. Doctors say she wants to speak with you, to make things right before—" He trailed off. Eleanor felt Samuel appear beside her, protective as always. But looking at Marcus, really looking, she saw not the cruel man who'd burned their barn, but a son facing his mother's mortality. "I'll come," Eleanor said quietly. The Briggs house felt smaller than Eleanor remembered, or perhaps she had grown larger than her fears. Martha lay in bed, a shadow of the formidable woman who had made Eleanor's life miserable. Her eyes, when they found Eleanor's face, held something that might have been regret. "I was wrong," Martha whispered, each word an effort. "About you, about everything. I was so angry when James died, needed someone to blame. You were easy to hurt." Eleanor sat beside the bed, feeling the strange lightness that comes with releasing old anger. "I forgive you," she said simply. "Not for your sake, but for mine. I won't carry hatred into my daughter's life." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "The inheritance, I tried to steal it. I was so sure you didn't deserve—" "It's done," Eleanor interrupted gently. "Let it go, Martha. Make peace with your sons, with yourself. That's all that matters now." When she left an hour later, Eleanor felt a chapter of her life closing. Martha Briggs died 3 days later, and Eleanor attended the funeral, standing in the back with Samuel, offering silent forgiveness to a woman who had learned too late that cruelty planted always yields a bitter harvest. Winter came gently that year, and with it, a letter that would change everything once again. The territorial government, impressed by their work with displaced women, offered to fund an expansion, a proper school, dormitories, training facilities. The Murphy Ranch could become the Murphy Institute, a beacon of hope across the prairie. "It's too much," Eleanor said, staring at the letter. "We're not equipped." "Yes, we are," Samuel interrupted. "Look what we've built already. Look who you've become." He gestured to the window, where Annie, now trained as a seamstress, was teaching Rose to embroider. 6 women came here broken. 6 women are leaving whole, with skills and dignity and futures. How many more could we help? That night, as hope slept between them, a habit they couldn't seem to break, Eleanor and Samuel planned. They would accept the funding, but on their terms. No woman would be turned away for appearance or past mistakes. Education would be practical, but also include reading, writing, arithmetic. Most importantly, every woman would be treated as what she was, a human being deserving of respect and opportunity. "From servant to savior," Samuel murmured, stroking Eleanor's scarred cheek. "Though you were never really a servant, you were always a queen. You just needed to remember your crown." Eleanor kissed him, this man who saw her truly and loved her completely. "We did this together, all of it. And we'll do the rest together too," he promised. Spring came again, as it always did, bringing new growth and new hope. The Murphy Institute's first official class began with 12 women from across the territory. Eleanor stood before them, hope playing at her feet, and saw her own journey reflected in their wary, hopeful faces. "Welcome," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Welcome to your new beginning. Here, you'll learn skills to support yourselves. But more than that, you'll learn that beauty isn't about perfect faces or unblemished skin. Beauty is survival. Beauty is kindness. Beauty is the choice to keep living, keep hoping, keep growing despite everything that tries to break you." She touched her scarred face. no longer a source of shame but a map of her journey. I was told I was ugly, cursed, worthless. I believed it for too long. But love, real love, sees past surfaces to souls, and souls, my dear friends, can always be polished bright again. Later, as the students settled into their dormitory, Eleanor found Samuel in the new barn, Hope on his shoulders, both of them feeding carrots to the horses. "No regrets?" she asked, leaning against the stall door. Samuel lifted Hope down and pulled Eleanor close, creating a perfect circle of three. "How could I regret the life we've built? From that first day you arrived, scared and scarred, to now, this place of healing, this family, this love that keeps growing stronger, even with a house full of broken women learning to be whole. Especially then," Samuel said firmly. "We're all broken, Eleanor, every last one of us. The lucky ones find other broken people to build something beautiful with." As if understanding, Hope clapped her chubby hands and babbled something that sounded almost like home. "That's right, little one," Eleanor said, kissing her daughter's head. "Home, where the broken come to heal, where the lost come to be found, where love makes all things new." The sun set over the Murphy Institute, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the dormitory, women who had given up on happiness began to dream again. In the main house, a family born of sorrow and forged in courage prepared for evening, their love a quiet testament to the power of choosing hope over fear. And somewhere in the great tapestry of the frontier, their story wove itself into legend, the tale of an ugly widow and a lonely cowboy who found in each other not what they expected, but everything they needed. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with scars, and the strongest foundations are built by hands that have known both breaking and mending. The prairie wind carried their story far and wide, whispering to all who would listen, "You are not your worst moment. You are not your scars. You are worthy of love, capable of healing, and stronger than you know." And in the Murphy house, as every evening, three hearts beat as one, proof that love indeed makes all things beautiful in its time. Thank you all for listening to this story of love, redemption, and the courage to begin again. If you're enjoying these tales from the Wild West, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as Eleanor and Samuel connected across their pain. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of frontier love and courage. And share your thoughts about Eleanor and Samuel's journey. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your sunset.